Yes, I'm Dr. Larry Ross. I'm currently the area minister for the North Texas area Christian Church of Chapel of Christ in the Southwest, also known as the last area minister standing. I'll be retiring at the end of this year, so I have like 218 days to go. But for the last 15 years, I've just really had a delightful ministry. One of the best parts of it has been working with ministers who have been discerning whether or not they should go into search and call, and if they are to go into search and call, what are the best practices to have a successful result of that decision.
Very good. And before you were in judicatory ministry, and we'll ask you to define judicatory in just a minute. Before you did that, you were in a local church?
I was. I've pastored 3 local churches, actually. Student ministry when I was at Clover Stockton College. I was an associate for 3 years at Oak Cliff Christian Church when I was at seminary. I pastored First Christian Church of Hematite, Missouri. If you know where Hematite is, you get an extra bonus.
We can all Google it now.
It's south of St. Louis a ways.
We do have one person waving. He says he knows where that's at.
Well, that's awesome. Awesome. Then I went from there, came back to Dallas, where I was a senior pastor at Pleasant Grove Christian Church for 8 years, and then went to Traverse City, First Christian Church of Traverse City, Michigan, for 10 years. I came back to Dallas to become area minister 15 years ago.
Nice. Yeah, very good. Thank you. So Larry, you've got some prepared remarks, but I just went through this process.
Yes.
About 3 years ago, started the process of discerning a call to regional ministry, and I tell you, there's a lot of emotion that runs through making that decision, and how would you have responded? I'd come to you and said, thinking it's time for me to call it go. What would you have said to me?
Well, I think I did say to you, and would say to anyone who has that kind of question to ask, I'd say, that's, first of all, people come to that decision for several different reasons. Sometimes there is a real discernment that God's purpose for you in your present place of ministry is, in fact, over, and that God has something else for you. Other times, unfortunately, search and call can look attractive because of the painfulness of your current situation. And for those that are dealing with that motivation, I would say that think carefully, pray a lot, ask the question, can you possibly redeem your current situation? Or are you the victim of bad relationships or decisions that make staying painful? Or is that you're truly feeling a call to another specific ministry? We talked about judicatory a minute ago, and that simply means the regional person who is above the local church level, whose specific task it is to help people to make their way through those decisions and discernments about whether there's a real reason to enter search and call, or whether the motivation is simply to avoid pain. So what we want you to do is to try to pray a lot and think carefully and see if there might be some ways to restore your current ministry to a satisfaction-producing level. Now, sometimes we enter search and call because there's no choice. Sometimes there's conflict in the church, and those who are responsible for the affairs of that church can terminate our call, and you don't have a choice in that. Sometimes you have time to process that, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes your ministry is running out of money. I think in most cases it's important to know that search and call, once you enter the decision of going into search and call, it can take a long time. There's a discernment phase, there's a preparation phase, then there's active participation in search and call. And that process can take 6 months, 18 months, sometimes longer. So it's important, if you really believe that you're not going to have the opportunity to salvage or to stay your present ministry, that you begin laying back some financial resources so that you can not let income lack push you out of a current situation or force you into a new but unmatched situation for yourself. I would say the should I question, we should certainly try as ministers, if we felt a true sense of call to our current ministry, we ought to try to keep that ministry if at all possible, unless we're really certain that God is calling us elsewhere. We need to follow the good advice of my mama, who said, don't ever quit a job until you have a job. And I think it's important to understand that search and call is not without a cost. When somebody calls me, Andy, and they're in a ministry situation, painful or otherwise, I really help them walk through the costs, psychological as well as financial, of making the decision to enter search and call. Whether you leave your current ministry setting or not, just the act of entering into search and call itself comes with some costs. There's a background check fee, for instance, that you have to pay to enter into the search and call process. But there's also an unrecognized, often psychological and spiritual cost, because once you file your paperwork to enter search and call, there's this thing that happens. It always happens. I've had ministers argue with me, oh, this won't happen. But in every case, afterwards, if I do a debriefing, they say, you were right. What you described as happening did happen. And that is the fact that when you make a decision to enter into search and call, there is the beginning of a divorce process, a mental divorce process between you and your current ministry partner. And if you think about it, this is pretty inevitable. I don't think you can really invest yourself entirely in a ministry if you're pretty sure that this ministry is not going to be part of your life in so many months. And I think some ministers enter search and call, and sometimes they keep it so hidden, and their current ministry arc is leading the church into a major financial commitment like a building program. I think there's some ethical issues if you enter into search and call, and while you're doing that, you lead your church to go into debt. I think that's an issue. And it's really hard to see down the road in your current ministry situation if you are planning to be somewhere else down the road there. And then some people report a feeling, really guilt feeling, that they're somehow cheating on their current ministry situation by flirting with another ministry. So if you enter search and call and then you don't find a new ministry, it is hard. Now, it's not impossible, but it will be hard to re-enter your current ministry with all the zeal you had for it. And that's a price you pay. A second price you pay if you do enter search and call, one of the peculiar and necessary pieces of search and call are the references. In the current disciple search and call process does require that you have 4 references. One will be your regional staff person who supports you. Another may be a friend or a relative or a clergy colleague, but at least 2 are supposed to be from your current place of ministry. When you ask somebody in your current place of ministry to serve as a reference for you, that forever changes your relationship with that person. They're going to look at you differently, with a shielded sadness. They may understand your decision. They may even agree with it. But the process will begin of their grieving, knowing that you will be likely leaving sometime soon. And then if you don't actually leave and stay in your current place of ministry, they're going to know that you've not always been fully committed to that ministry because they knew you were in search and call. So, and then a third price you pay, and it's not a major price, but I think it needs to be recognized. Sometimes when we enter search and call, it can be a very ego-stroking experience. People are suddenly interested in you. You're getting phone calls. You're getting inquiries. You're being courted. It feels good. And if we're not careful and if we're not aware that that's part of the psychological dynamic of being in search and call, when we drop out of the search and call process, or we go to a new place of ministry and we're no longer the focus of excitement and attention, that can be difficult for us as well. So that's kind of the questions I ask people who are not yet in search and call, who are thinking about search and call, to think about before they even start the process. Are you sure? Is this what God wants for you? Are you willing to pay the price? And I think those are all biblical and spiritual concepts that are worth touching on. So the second part of what I want to talk about in this webinar, first part, should I enter? The second part would be, how do I prepare the profile? How do I prepare the search and call profile? And I would say about that you should prepare it carefully. Don't dash it off because you're upset after a bad board meeting and write out your stuff and push send that night. Your search and call profile is your last chance to make a first impression on hundreds of churches that are looking for a new pastoral staff. So take your time with it. Overarching concerns include making sure you have good grammar, good spelling. Here, your regional support person would be very handy. I ask ministers under my care, I offer them the privilege or the choice of sending me their search and call material before they hit send. And I'll look it over, and if I see any grammar errors or any spelling errors, I'll point those out. And if I see any obvious mistakes that will cause a search committee to just reject that profile out of hand, I'll point those out. Because my intent, any regional support staff person, our intent is to help a successful search happen. So take advantage of that if it's offered. If it's not offered, ask for it, and see if your regional support person would take a look at your profile before you hit send. You want to write well. Write with vivid language. Use adjectives and adverbs. Put in detail without being overabundant with your words. And I would say at least as much effort needs to go into your search and call profile as you would put into a final exam to get credit for a seminary class. Remember this, and this is part of the reality of the system, which isn't perfect. But search and call committees will get their candidate profiles printed in batches. They may get 10, 15, 20 at a time. And the system forces these committees to weigh the profiles against each other. And ultimately, what happens, at least the first go around, is a search committee will look at 15, 20 profiles, and they'll look, unfortunately, for reasons to exclude rather than reasons to pursue. So you want to make sure that your search and call paperwork does not give a search committee a reason to knee-jerk exclude you. And some of the ways that can happen are poorly worded essays or politically hot-button topics that you wax about, or criticism of the current ministry setting. Just things that don't go over well when a search committee might read your paperwork. So you want to give search committees reasons to pursue you rather than reasons to exclude you. And you want to stand out. So, I've read a lot of profiles where I know this person, and I know they have done some outstanding work that deserves to be explained or at least revealed in the search and call profiles. But because of a sense of humility, the minister doesn't mention that accomplishment or that particular interest. And I would say, if you want to stand out, make sure that you don't withhold that kind of thing. Now, don't express it in a pompous or arrogant way, but just list, if you were an officer in your local ministry alliance, just list it. There's a space for that kind of listing in your paperwork. So then you've got those essays, all those essays you have to write as part of the search and call profile. You have to choose your top 4 competencies. You have to choose areas in which you need improvement. And I would say, never ever lie. You would never do that, but don't lie or shade the truth on your papers. At the same time, be judicious when you're discussing your weakness. We all have areas where we need improvement. And to reveal an area or two that you need improvement is honest, and it shows you are self-aware. I've read some profiles where the person goes on and on and on about a particular area of weakness, and it really came across as false humility or very low self-esteem. And neither of those are desirable in a candidate. A search committee will pick up on that and could use that as a reason to exclude. Now, one of the things I'm really strong about is that when you write an essay,
And you have all those questions. You have the competency questions, and then you also have the questions, the 7 or 9 essay questions. Those questions are important, and your answers, the first line of those answers need to be different, creative, and memorable. I can't tell you how many profiles where it says, I asked or describe when you met Christ and called to ministry. It starts out with the phrase, I became a Christian at a very early age, or I became a Christian, or I was baptized at such and such an age. You've missed an opportunity to set yourself up as somebody with something interesting to say and an interesting style with which to say it. So try to be memorable with that first sentence at least. They're going to frame the reader's expectation for the rest of the document. And then I'd say be realistic about your preferences, what they say about you. It's hard. You get that forced set of answers. Do you want to be in a church of 0 to 50, 50 to 150, whatever those categories are? And you always ponder what you should answer in those preference questions, the profile questions. It's interesting, small church search committees will sometimes actually exclude candidates if they see that you're looking for a 350 plus congregation. And it may be that small congregation has resources, and maybe it has a great destiny, and maybe it's in a fast-growing area, and it would be the perfect place for you. But because you have chosen the largest category, you've excluded yourself, because a small church search team will say, this person would never possibly be interested in us. Whereas a large church will usually not penalize you if you indicate you'd be willing to go to, say, a medium-sized church. Another way that we sometimes see candidates self-limit to excess is when they state their financial preferences. You need to be, I think, on the lower end of what you can take as a pastor, what you put in that compensation box. Typically nowadays, churches have a figure in mind for salary, housing, pension, and contribution toward health, and it's typically a fixed figure. And if they see you've asked for less than that, they will usually still give you their intended larger figure. But on the other hand, if a congregation has a smaller figure than that, but you still might be able to squeeze into that ministry financially, but if they see you've asked for too much and they can't possibly reach that level, they will just discard you. They won't even try to pursue you as a possible candidate. So be realistic about that. Don't price yourself out of the market. And then I would say be realistic where you're going to let your papers be circulated. And know this, that every restriction will shrink the pool of places that will consider you. If you're not willing to move, you are basically pinning yourself to a circle of what, an hour's drive? And even choosing general circulation with strong preferences, you need to be aware, a lot of search committees will look at that list of regions that you prefer, and if you haven't listed their region as a region you prefer, they will say, well, this person really wants to go to the upper Midwest, or go out west, or go up north, or stay down south, and they're not really interested. They wouldn't really be interested in coming to our part of the country. So, I understand why there's a regional preference with strong preference, but use that very carefully, if at all. Now, on the other hand, if you have no intention of going to Hawaii, then by no means include that region in your search profile, your preferences. It's just unfair. If you've already made up your mind to not go to a certain part of the country, then just don't list it at all. And then again, be realistic about the type of community you're looking for. Again, the least restrictive, the better. Every restriction you put, financially, size, location, shrinks the pool of possible places that could consider you for ministry. Now, once you've gone through that process, once you have prayed about it, once you've thought about it, you've talked about your significant others, you've visited with your colleagues that you trust, you've talked to your regional staff support person, you've gone through and you've prepared your search and call paperwork, you've let someone you trust eyeball it and suggest changes, so you've had a good person with good editing skills, and make sure there's no grammar flaws or spelling flaws. And if you're sure, then press send, and you are now in Search and Call. It'll take a while for your paperwork to show up to the various regional staff people that handle Search and Call across the country. To some extent, you're at the mercy of your references. They need to do their references, and sometimes you may have to remind them graciously that you're waiting on them, and remind them to fill out that reference. Sometimes it's possible that the link to the reference never got to them in the first place, and you need to find out what the problem is if it's taking a long time. So that's kind of how to get into Search and Call, discern it, then do your paperwork well, and then you wait. You wait for what I call first contact. And while you're waiting, it can take a week, it can take a month, it can take 3 months. There's some things you should do. First of all, make sure that you have a sermon or 3 recorded and on a private YouTube channel or other platform, the link to which you are going to supply to search committees. These sermons ought to be representative of your normal preaching effectiveness. Don't give them the home run sermon unless you want to be held to that standard the rest of your life. Also, you may want to prepare supplemental biographical material. That really ought to have been in Search and Call, but the profile didn't allow it. So you might put together a sheet of other things to know about yourself, pictures of your family, of your pet, of your golf stroke, whatever it is that you think people might be interested in. And that's what you're going to send during the exchange of information, which can happen right after the first contact occurs. We'll talk about that in a minute. The second thing I want you to think about in the process is look at your social media. You probably should do this before you hit send. Make sure that your Facebook account, your blogs, your vlogs, any place where you're published in any way, shape, or form, make sure that it is all right. Know this, that search committees today are very sophisticated, and they will search to the nth degree for any indication of you on social media. And if they find anything on your social media accounts that is objectionable to whatever they're looking for, that can be an immediate discarding of that paperwork, and you'll never even get seen. You'll never know. None of us ever know how many search committees looked at our profiles and said, not this one, and never made first contact. So it's a fairly easy fix to go through your social media presence and make sure there's nothing there that's going to get you discarded without you even knowing it. At the same time, a winsome social media presence is a really good thing to have, because it articulates and shows that you can use that communication methodology not only to your benefit, but could use it to the benefit of the church. So I'm not saying discard your social media. I'm just saying look through it and make sure there's nothing in there that's going to hurt you. So first contact happens. What an exciting moment. First contact will usually be by the chair of the search committee or the pulpit committee. It'll come without warning. The purpose of first contact is for the search chair to find out if you are, first of all, are you still available? Have you, in the time since your profile has been in a Search and Call, have you taken another position? Sometimes we ministers forget to tell Search and Call that we have taken a ministry, and our profiles will stay in Search and Call for a year or more, and we'll wonder why we're still getting phone calls. Well, you need to make that contact with the Search and Call people and let them know that you've taken a position, and that'll put an end to that, not harassment. It's always fun to get a first contact, but it's time to spare the local churches the time of investigating to see if you're even available. But you're going to be asked, are you still available? And the second thing that they're going to ask, after a short description of the ministry they're looking for and the community they're in, they're going to ask if you would be willing to consider being considered by that ministry to invest your life in for a period of years. And this particular first contact is going to be brief, maybe in 2 or 3 minutes. They're going to propose usually they'll propose a exchange of information. They're going to propose that they'll send you what I call a brag bag. They don't all use that term, but I try to teach search committees to assemble a bag of material like that they would use to try to recruit a doctor to their community, and ought to have their Constitution and bylaws, a copy of their publications, a link to their Facebook pages, whatever, a map of the community, maybe the real estate section, some material from the Chamber of Commerce. So a good search committee will have what's called a brag bag, and they'll propose sending that to you in exchange for a link to a sermon by you, which is why you should have one ready, and any other information you'd want to send them. And so you will exchange that information. They will process it, and some days or even weeks will come by, and you may, even at that early phase, get a Dear John notification. That's something to be glad about, because it means you have clarity about the situation. Or you'll get an invitation to continue in the process, or you'll hear nothing at all. And unfortunately, sometimes search committees, they don't stay on task and with expeditious timing, and sometimes a long period of time can lapse between contacts. Don't freak, don't get discouraged. You may still hear from them. If that time lag after first contact becomes excessive, and you feel bad about it and you want some counsel about it, your regional resource person could help with that situation and let you know, well, they're just slow, or they're talking to somebody else with some interest, but they're still interested in you, and you may hear from them. So there are a lot of search committees that can go and do go silent. Just use this premise: you are still a candidate until you hear for sure that you're not. So then in the normal process, if you are a continuing candidate, you'll get a call for a conference call at which you're going to be asked a certain set of questions. It could be a phone conference. It could be a video conference. It may even be a face-to-face conference early on. Churches differ. Typically, they'll make an appointment for that conference call. They will have a pre-set list of 8 or so questions. They'll also have a couple of questions that come out of your particular paperwork. And then they'll call you, and you'll have this opportunity face-to-face or over the phone to have a dialogue. So what they're looking for, by the way, is a couple things. They're certainly looking for the answers to the questions they ask. They're also looking for how you communicate verbally and what kind of social manners you may have. So don't rush your answers. Be at peace. Try to be confident and settled, and be earnest, and answer the questions as they are posed to you. And then typically at the end of those 8 prepared questions that they're asking all the candidates, they may be doing 3 or 4 or 5 conference calls in this initial phase. You're also going to then ask a couple of questions from your particular paperwork, and those will help them figure out some things that maybe you weren't clear about or are particularly interesting about you. Then normally they're going to ask a very important question at the end. At the end, they're going to ask, do you have any questions for us? Now, it's really important that you do your research on their brag bag, if you've gotten it, and on their church through whatever they sent you, but also through the other means of information. Certainly look at their web presence and see what you can learn about that. So they're going to ask you those personal questions, and then they'll end with prayer, and they'll bring that call or that visit to an end. Now, there may be a second conference call if you're a continuing candidate, or they may move to bring you in as a finalist, or they may let you know that you've not made that list. If they let you know that you've not made the continuing candidate list, thank them for their hard work. But if they tell you that you're going to be continued to be a candidate of interest, that's a good thing. What you want to do is they're also going to, at that point, once they screen you through the conference calls, their next step is generally to look at references. and you may or may not hear about that. Your references may or may not tell you that they've been contacted. If they do, that's nice, because now you know that you've made that level of interest in the process. But they are getting serious, and if the next step is to bring you in for a visit, you know that you are serious, that they are interested, they are getting serious. And my rule of thumb that I want to share with candidates at that point is, if in your heart you have already said no to a church and they want to bring you in for a visit, tell them no. I think it's unfair to a church to have them incur cost if you really know that you're not going to say yes to that ministry situation. It's better to hurt their feelings than it is to have them waste or spend precious resources on somebody that's not going to take the position if offered. So they bring you in for the first of at least one, maybe two visits if you're the successful candidate, and there's a protocol for that. The church is supposed to pay your expenses, be content with how they want to treat you. They offer to put you up in a hotel, a rental car, flight, travel, it all should be reimbursed. It's okay and recommended that you not stay in a member's home. Lots of reasons for that, but sometimes churches will try to save money, and they'll say, well, we have a widow lady or a widow gentleman with an extra bedroom, and would you mind staying there? It's really okay to say that you're not comfortable with that and that you would like to stay in a motel if possible. So be clear about that. When you arrive, whatever time commitments you have made, be on time, be cheerful, be yourself. They're going to be watching your every move. They're going to be hanging on your every word. They're going to tell you a lot about their degree of interest in you by how they relate to you in that setting. Typically, there's a meal involved. Then there's another set of questions. They are really more than the answers to the questions. They're wanting to see how you relate to them. So, I've heard of candidates pulling out their cell phones during the middle of a dinner or during a question answer session, and that's just not good manners. So be at your best during those kinds of situations. At some point, if you are willing and they are willing, they're going to feel, or you're going to feel, what I call the Holy Spirit wiggle. The Holy Spirit wiggle is, I think, God's way of indicating to us that this is a match God approves of. You'll sense certainty that these people you can love, this situation you can deal with and bring goodness and growth and depth to this ministry situation. And they're looking for the opportunity to visualize you in the ministry role in which they're interested in you. They can sense you and see you in the pulpit in their mind's eye and feel themselves being blessed by you. Then the Spirit is going to speak to their spirit and speak to your spirit. And there's going to be this sense that, yeah, this really could be what God wants for us. And they're going to ask whether you are willing to enter into negotiations. Now, that's a sacred phrase. Are you willing to enter into negotiations with a view to you to becoming their senior pastor or associate or chaplain or whatever it is you're looking for? And you may ask the same question. You may say, I really feel like things are going great guns in this time together, and I'm feeling a real desire to become your pastor. Do you feel the same? And if they say yes, then they or you would say, would you like to enter into exclusive negotiations? When that happens, if you both agree, you have entered into a special period of time with special expectations. If you answer yes, you are obligated at that point to cease communications with other ministries. Tell them that you have entered into conversation with another church and that you will not be talking to them until that situation is resolved. Now you can say, I'm still interested in you. If by some chance this other situation doesn't come through, if it's all right with you, I'd like to be able to get back to you and maybe we can pick this up. But until this other negotiation is complete, I cannot talk to you any longer. The church that is calling you or interested in you also has to cease communications as well, with a similar caveat. It is unethical to be in negotiations with multiple ministries at the same time. I can't say that too strongly. It is unethical to try to play one church off or one ministry off against another to try to elevate the compensation. It's unethical to use that as a lever to panic them into offering you the position. I'm sure you would never do that, but just know that that's looked down on in today's world of ministry ethics. And then if you're still the number one candidate and you enter into that period of negotiation, things can go a lot of different ways. You have final negotiations, board meeting may be called to approve you as a candidate. You may or may not be asked to that. The congregation will have a meeting to confirm the call of yourself to that ministry position. You may or may not be asked to come to that. Typically, we try not to do beauty pageant sermons anymore where the church calls 3 people 3 consecutive weekends and picks the best preacher of the 3. I mean, that's hardly ever done anymore. It used to be done. Typically, they don't even ask you to do a trial sermon, so to speak, although still done on occasion. More typical, they'll do a congregational meeting. They'll introduce you at the meal with that meeting, and you'll be asked to make a few remarks. Typically, that's not a sermon. It's more of an after-dinner speech. Just kind of tell the congregants about yourself and be winsome, and your family probably ought to be there for that. And then they'll send you home or tell you to go in the back of the church, and they're going to vote on you. And at some point, you'll find out whether or not you are the successfully called a person for that call. When you're in negotiations, we really try to get away from what we'd call haggling. Churches, in my opinion, ought to pay the position and not the person. The first offer a church makes to a candidate ought to be their best offer. They should make that known to you, in my opinion, early on in the process. If you can't stretch to live in their midst and minister for that fee, you ought to truncate the process and end it right there, rather than think, well, I'll lead them on and then I'll try to negotiate a higher price down the road. It's really not done. So have done enough research to know that if they offer you X number of dollars for salary, housing, pension, and health, that you can live on that. And then if that's the case, then proceed with the negotiation and the acceptance. I think that's pretty much what I have in mind. I remind you that once you have been called to the new ministry, you should get a letter of call with all the details filled out, signed. You should send a copy to Search and Call. You should send a copy to your regional minister. You should send a copy to, save a copy for yourself or multiple copies. There have been many occasions when a minister has been in a situation for 15, 20, 25 years, and then something comes up and you feel like you were promised a sabbatical or a leave or some benefit, and it's not in the letter of Search and Call, or you can't find a letter of Search and Call, and then it becomes an issue. So get those things hammered out and preserve your copy. Make sure that those who need the copy get that copy. And then you have to give notice at your current church. That can be painful, often is. Let them do what they want to do to honor you. But remember, this is for their benefit, not yours. It's not their job to make you feel better about leaving. It's your job to help them successfully deal with their grief about your leaving. And your job is to leave your ministry better than you found it. So leave your congregation, even if it was a bad situation that caused you to go into Search and Call, leave on a positive note. Leave blessing them and not cursing them. And there's a really good monograph by Alban Institute called Running Through the Thistles. That's a little bit dated at this point, but it's very helpful to help you understand psychological processes that you are bringing to your current ministry because you have chosen to leave. I look at ministers, one of the big things that I look at is what condition was the church when they left? And you are in control to a large degree about whether you bring blessing as you leave or not. So having a choice, I would ask that you bring blessing if you can. So Andy, that's what I have.
Great. We have several questions that have come online, and then we've unmuted everybody. so that they can ask their questions as well. But let me ask these online questions first. The easiest one is actually the first one. That is, if you're not their area minister, or after you retire, who does somebody call if they're in a position where they need judicatory response from the region?
Well, every region, and Southwest region is one of those, has regional staff people, regional ministers, associate regional ministers, community regional ministers. And typically, even in a region as large as the Southwest region, there's going to be somebody who will have a pastoral responsibility for your church. So that's the person that I would contact with those particular things.
And this next one's a little bit more involved, and you hinted at some of it. But he says, when you're thinking about compensation, what are your best recommendations for pastors recently ordained, going into their first call? How do you know what is a reasonable amount to ask for? And then is there a checklist? You mentioned some of those. It's not in the letter of call.
Yes.
Is there a checklist of the things that ought to be included in the letter of call?
So the answer to the second question, most of the things, I think pretty well all the things that you need to have clarity about before you take a call are in fact in the letter of call, which you can find online. ccsw.org, I think, has a digital copy of the letter of call. So does the pastor's office. What's the ministry in Indianapolis that handles that? You can
Warren Lynn's office.
Yeah, Warren Lynn's office will have on his website. Website page, you'll see a whole lot of resources. It's one of the things you should do before you enter search and call is be very familiar with all the resources where you can find out factual information, including that congregational letter of call. I think this book is now on the Southwest Regional website. It's called Seeking a Pastor. For years, if you were a pastor, it was hard for you to get a copy of this to see what was being said about the process from the other side. I think it's just smart to read this manual and accompanying materials that is listed on the tab on the CCSW website. Used to be looking for ministry leadership or something like that. And you have all that data is there. As far as, what's reasonable compensation, it's going to vary. It's going to vary according to the church than it is for the ordained or commissioned minister. And, the rule of thumb is that a minister ought to be paid at least as much as a new teacher in the school district, if not more. A minister with some experience ought to be able to make what a associate or actual principal of a local high school makes. The reality is that churches pay what churches can pay, and what is a living wage in today's world? I tell churches, and I just do this because sometimes churches want to know how much they're going to need in order to have a reasonable expectation to find a seminary trained person as their next pastor. I tell them nowadays, if you can't put $55,000 to $60,000 on the table, at the minimum, you should consider stepping down to a 3/4 time or part-time ministry situation. Because I think it takes about that much, if not more, to have any kind of a hope of a living wage. Plus, you've got crushing student loan debt and all those other factors. So from my position, I try to encourage churches to pay more. I'm sure they don't appreciate that, but I think that laborer is worthy of his or her hire. And I would hope that you could find a position that could pay what you can live on. That's the important thing to me. You're never going to get rich being a minister, but you ought to at least be able to put food on the table and a roof over your head. And you should know that there are some churches that pay really, really well, but most churches are really struggling today. So the thing that I see most often that I counsel new entrants into search and call most often is when they don't do preacher math. And preacher math goes like this. When I say how much is the package, and I'm a minister, what I mean is how much is salary, housing, pension, and a contribution toward health. That's the four things, to me, as a minister, add up to the package. Unfortunately, a lot of churches, when they say we're offering a package of, $80,000 or $70,000, typical in today's world, sometimes they're lumping in business expenses. And you need to be very clear. Now, is there a housing, is there a auto allowance? Is there a continuing education allowance? Is there a sabbatical policy? Those are the kinds of things that careful examination of the search and call letter will help you remember to ask about. Does that answer the question, Andy?
Yeah. And then I had a question about criminal background checks.
Yes.
How long do they take? Can you enter search and call without having one completed? And then I've got a follow-up question along those lines about what if you got a ding on your criminal background check? How do you deal with that?
You're first of all, you're always honest, and it'll show up. You'll be required to. Well, first of all, there's actually two pieces that you need to be aware of if you have a ding in your background. You've got the criminal background check that you have to pay $160 for. That is done by Oxford Documents, and that will show any criminal convictions and things like that. And if you have one of those, you need to be forthright. The congregation is going to know that there's a ding. They may not know what the ding is, but you need to tell them, and they may bring it up. What was this problem on your background check? And you tell them, well, when I was 17, I did this, or when I was 25, I did this. And this is what I've tried to do since then to remediate the situation. This is the counseling I've had. This is the redirection I've made, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's also, in your search and call profile, disclosure statement. And in there, you're supposed to disclose other things as well. And anything you say, any question you answer with a yes, you have the opportunity to write an essay, explanatory paragraph that gives the particulars. And again, focus on what steps you have taken to not let that particular incident or activity happen again in your life. Fortunately, the church is a place of forgiveness and redemption. And I've seen churches that rejoiced in being part of a reclamation project, reclamation of a minister who had great gifts and a great love for the Lord and fell by the wayside. And they're willing to bring that person back up into ministry. I have, to be honest, seen other churches that, any kind of a blot on your disclosure statement or your criminal background check, it's a automatic dismissal. So you wouldn't want to be in a church like that anyway. So it's not a loss.
Very good.
Yeah. Follow-up question.
So how long does a criminal background check take to get done?
Boy, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that.
And you aren't allowed to enter search and call until that's done.
Well, it's part of the process. They won't process your search and call submission until you've paid the fee and they have the opportunity to run the background check.
Larry, this is.
Yes.
Yeah, Larry, this is Christine. Some of those could come back in as little as 7 days. And if you've been in the military and you've been high-level military, they can take as much as 6 weeks to get back.
Yep,
You're cleaner and clearer than any of the rest of us. Some of those take a long time. That's why you have to start search and call way out, because that may be the one thing that keeps you from being available as soon as you want to be.
And it is a source of frustration when everything else is done and your background check's not back yet. You can't do anything to hurry it. So those are good words. Start that if you're going to go into search and call, that probably ought to be the first thing that you
do that first and do your references first.
Yes.
So that they're working, and then that'll give you a week or two to get your own profile done.
Indeed.
Yeah, thanks for letting me interrupt.
No, thank you.
This is Peggy. I think it's also important to share that as a rule, congregations reimburse you for the expense of the background check when they call you to serve and to accept the call in the church. And so that $160 that you pay up front, if that's still the going price, is often recouped by the ministerial candidate when they accept a call.
Not only is it often recouped, it's supposed to be recouped. If you look on the letter of call, there's a line there that indicates that they are supposed to reimburse you for the criminal background check. Now, it's kind of funny. I've told search and call committees, and if you call a candidate, you are responsible to pay the $160 background check. And they say, anyone we call, we have to, meaning anyone of 3 or 4 or 5 people they actually engage. No. It's the successful candidate that you issue a call to. If that's the person you pay back the 160.
Good. Thank you all. What other questions do you have? Microphones are open. If you're unmuted, if you want to ask a question, we'll just take what first come. We got about 8 minutes left. So I want to go back then to a question that I had as you were talking. We have an alphabet soup as ministers: CCSW, TRA, CPE, and it really was about that CPE that I wonder about. Do you find that search committees know when they look at the credentialing and the additional information, do they know what CPE is? Do they know what PRAR is? Or is it better that that kind of experience, if it's been formative, gets incorporated into an answer in the essays?
Well, I would say, first of all, part of the work of the regional support staff with the search committee is to do an orientation. And during the orientation, there should be an explanation of those kinds of factors. Of what is CPE? And if I'm doing the orientation with the search committee, I'll tell them the value of CPE in bringing self-awareness to a candidate is almost always a good thing, not to be afraid of. And a lot of candidates, they don't understand or recognize that clarity about self is very winsome when it comes to search and call documents. That the CPE is viewed as a plus. And then if you can incorporate, if you want to incorporate an answer about CPE, you may say something like, in my CPE, I learned this about myself, and let them know that you value the experience. I think the congregations that have people who are in industries where high levels of training are required, I think they appreciate that kind of thoroughness.
Larry, thank you so much.
Sure.
Boy, this has been a great webinar, very informative. Had people saying you've been doing a good job on your chat function there. So,
good.
Appreciate the information. I have a copy of your written notes.
Yes.
We can put that online.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes.
And then I'll also try to put some links into different places where we got some of those documents that you referred to.
Sure.
And as you come to the end of your ministry, again, we want to say thank you. We'll have other opportunities to celebrate your ministry, but it has been a joy to work with you for the last year and a half.
Thank you.
For me. So if you wouldn't mind, would you close us in prayer?
I would love to. Lord, we know that you are a God of changes, that you bring people into our lives and you bring people out of our lives. We thank you that your church is a dynamic institution, that it's always growing, it's shrinking, it's growing, it's changing. We know that every ministry comes to an end. Some are pleasant ends, positive ends, celebratory ends. Some ends of ministries are full of chaos and pain. But Lord, you are the God of change, and you are in control of all of these situations. We would pray for all of our clergy brothers and sisters who are in pain in this moment because they are uncertain whether they can or should stay in their present ministry. I lift them to you, Lord. Give them wisdom in their discernment. If there is a way to redeem their circumstance or situation, I pray that you would lead them to it. If there is some personal relationship they need to mend, I pray that you will bring about the wisdom to mend it. But Lord, for those for whom your call is away from their current congregation or ministry, I pray that during the time of change and openness and chaos, that you would be very present to them. Sometimes it may feel like a dark hole. Sometimes it may feel like a never-ending trek through a desert with no end in sight. But Lord, you know the end. You see it. And so I pray you would bring the strength and the encouragement and the growth during that time of change that you want in the lives of those who are engaged in it. So bless us, Lord. Bless your church, that it might be healthy, vigorous, forward-looking, and growing. Bless those coming into leadership and looking to change. Bless all of us, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Nice job, Larry.
Thank you.
Thank you.